he talks about a plane coming from Los Angeles to New York City. And if it's just 1 degree off, that plane could end up 150 miles off course. Now, I can't find any actual like stats about how often flights are off course, and I think Stephen Covey said 90% of the time. And I don't think I can find those stats because it's not really the airplane is off course. It's just this is how you fly.
Yeah.
You make tiny micro adjustments as needed until you can get to where you're going.
Right.
But then we try to look at our life and imagine that there's this straight line between where I am and where I'm going, and that's just not true. Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we take hard-earned lessons from the mats and convert them into tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I am Ryan Hoover, and something about pollen and life and death and how
it's like plans. So plans, if you just stick to them and you're unwilling to budge, it's not a good thing.
It sticks to you like pollen?
It sticks to you like pollen. I don't know. Anyway, today we are moving to our second Plan A. I had a whole thing. I'm going to let it go.
Maybe it worked.
Maybe I'll put it on Instagram.
I just couldn't remember how to say it. So.
Oh, okay. Well, then good. So
something about pollen wanting to kill you, but also bringing life, and
plans are like pollen. It's life and death all in one. You
they got it.
Sure.
No need for more.
You know, I like to explain things.
Yeah, it goes so well.
It ruins everything. On this episode,
you know what?
Oh gosh.
It's literally like the only time that I personally experience frustration in this dynamic. Yeah. When you do something that I'm like, what in the world? And then you try to explain it and it gets so much worse.
You know what's funny is that's kind of part of this episode. We're going to get to habits and how they can be good, but they can also be bad because you stick to them, even though there are better things you maybe should be doing based on what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway, that's going to come back around. Look, I explained something. Did that make it worse? Are you frustrated? Okay. Anyway, I'm currently in my battle with pollen right now. So that's why plans and pollen came about. But on this episode, we are plating up some fresh insights on how small changes and small details can bring about some of the biggest impacts. So, are you ready to fire up your mind and sharpen your skills? Okay. I literally have in my notes crickets. That was pretty good. Let me start off with a dash of insight to this episode's origin story.
Oh my God.
That was it. That was the last one, I think. Ryan and I were rewatching The Bear, which we've already told you to watch before. So if you haven't, you really need to go watch it. In summary, it's about an award-winning chef. His name is Carmy Berzato. He returns home to Chicago to manage a chaotic restaurant and kitchen left behind by his late brother. It's an amazing series. And in season 2, episode 7...
I'm going to interrupt again.
Okay, great.
I have never seen an episode of anything that stressed me out so much as the Seven Fishes episode, the Christmas episode. Like the level of acting and writing and just overall production of that episode is amazing. Like it's ridiculously good. And there's so many like very well-known guest actors in that episode. Yeah. But holy crap, it is like the most stressful hour or whatever it is of TV ever. And like nobody dies or anything, but like it's
I forget the name of it. I want to say they call it like a box episode or something to that effect. It happens in one place.
Yeah.
Like that is one location.
It's insane. And I think it's insane for several reasons, but one of it is because on some level, I think we can all kind of relate to the tension that comes with bringing a lot of family and extended family into one like setting, and people that aren't around each other that much and that maybe have like opposing views and thoughts and whatever. And then you're trying to make it this perfect night and you add, alcohol and maybe some bipolar and a whole host of other things.
That
and
part,
yeah.
sure.
So anyway, okay. back to
So, and that's not even the episode we're talking about, but maybe there'll be an episode there at some point.
yeah.
So this is, I think, the episode after it. It's season 2, episode 7. It's called Forks. And Carmy sends his brother to this high-end, fancy restaurant to work there for a week as they prepare for their opening of their restaurant.
Cousin Richie.
Cousin Richie, indeed. And we love Richie.
Cousin.
We're here for some Richie.
I mean, I couldn't be around him much, but looking from the outside in, I love him.
So essentially, the entire episode is about how details matter and how every second counts. There's a lot of Taylor Swift as well. So Swifties, there you go. There's something in it for everyone. But it has one of our favorite lines from the series, which is micro basil. Fuck yeah. So that's how this whole episode started. We were rewatching that. Richie gets ready and just micro basil, fuck yeah, like the whole living room says it together. And you sent me a message with just kind of a string of thoughts a few minutes later, and thus an episode is born.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, like I think it's hard to understand without context, but basically Carmy, who is I guess the main character of the show, sends his cousin Richie to this very high-end restaurant, to what they call stage, which is basically you kind of apprentice. And he starts by literally, I think the first week, he literally just wipes down forks. Like, that's the job. And that's what he does for an entire shift, is just take a fork, wipe it down, take a fork, wipe it down. And you start to really understand quickly how this restaurant takes every little detail to heart. Like it truly is like everything matters, and there's no shortage of, like, you can find books on don't sweat the small stuff. You can find books on sweat the small stuff. Like, and no surprise for me, I'll say it depends, because not all small stuff is created equally, and if your goal is to have one of the best restaurants on the planet. So this episode, I think, is pretty highly influenced by a guy named Will Guidara, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but high-end restaurateur. He wrote a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, which the book is kind of wild to read, and there's a couple of stories in there that really stick with me and resonate with me. But you quickly figure out, like, if your goal is to truly be great, and I used to have a thing, we talked about this not too long ago, where it was everything in moderation unless you want to be great. And I truly think that, like, if you want to be like best of the best, top 1%, whatever, and whatever it is that you want to do, you can't do that with moderation, and you have to sweat the small stuff, and the details all do matter. And when you're talking about something like in this episode, it's literally, I think it was this part of the episode, Richie was working the front of the house. So he's basically a host, for lack of a better term. And part of this is just understanding, like, you're trying to guess what the patrons want before they even ask for it, and he kind of overhears the conversation where there's a family at a table, and they say, one of them says, we came to Chicago and I didn't even get to try deep dish pizza. And Richie just happens to overhear it. So he goes back, he tells whoever is back there, maitre d' or, chef, I can't remember. But they're like, so Richie's like, so you guys are going to make a deep dish pizza, right? And they're like, no. And they send him to a restaurant that's what they specialize in. Like, you literally see him running down the street to pick this up. He gets there, he picks up this deep dish pizza, he runs it back. The chef takes it out. The chef, like, chefs it up. He cuts it up into little small circles and whatever. And then they're doing all the last little prep work, and they throw some micro basil on there, and Richie's like, micro basil, fuck yeah. And in my message to you, I think I was like, it's one of those things where, like, if the micro basil wasn't there, nobody would have noticed it. Nobody would have paid any attention. Nobody would have cared. It wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever as far as they knew.
Right.
Because when you don't know what is possible, when you don't know what can be done, when you don't know what unreasonable is,
yeah,
then you have no frame of reference. So when you can make it about the experience, when you can make it about not just what's on the plate, but everything that went into getting it on the plate. Those are the things, the experiences, the things that people remember. They don't remember the micro basil for the micro basil. They remember the totality of the experience and the amount of care and thought and detail that went into creating that plate of food.
Yeah. And everything around just them having heard that conversation
Right.
and gone out to do that for them. The little details are going to separate out services and experiences every time. I mean, I some of my best haircuts like are when I'm going to the same person and they remember or they've made notes about what I like, the size of the blade they use, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
they don't have to ask me, well, how short do you want it here? How, and I'm like,
Right.
I don't know, do what you did last time.
Yeah.
And when you get that high level service that remembers what last time was,
Right.
that's a different type of experience than having to go in and stress about it and then worry that they're cutting it too short or whatever it might
Yep.
be. So micro basil, by the way, is about $6 for 2 ounces, so $3 an ounce, which is half the cost per ounce of Terramana, and still less than my favorite vegan cheese that is stupid expensive, which is $1 per ounce. So I just wanted to go ahead and kind of compare that out. But again, it's experiences as details.
Yep.
And, as a business owner, there's an untold amount of information that we could put in there. Everything from all of the senses when you walk into the business, into the center, the training center, the touch points between the front desk, the coaches, the members, all of that.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about that here before, but I know that I talk about it at every coaches course that I run. People don't stay because of the fitness or the self-defense or the skills that's what brings them there. They think they want to get into shape, or they think that they want to learn self-defense, or they want to learn jiu-jitsu or whatever. And on some level they do, but that's not what keeps them. What keeps them is the experience in its totality. The culture, the community that is created, the little things, the details, the micro basil, the things that they're not going to experience at a big box gym, for example. It's the difference in this restaurant we're talking about, and I don't know, I'll say TGI Fridays because I think they're out of business now, and so I'm not going to piss anybody off. But where you're mass producing food, but not a personalized experience, and the food might be fine. But again, like, you can get good food at a lot of places, and it's the way that the host treats you. It's the way that the waiter or the waitress treats you. It's the little things on the plate that stand out, that make you want to take a picture of it and put it on Instagram. Those kinds of things people remember. People remember how they were treated, how they were welcomed into a training center. People remember that, we reached out to them when they missed a class.
Yeah, I was going to say the micro basil for our centers would be calling because we haven't seen somebody in a while.
Yeah.
Would be welcoming this person by name, introducing them to the coach, introducing them to a student that's right next to them, so that they start being part of the community and the family, and people know who they are, and not just, okay, there's a stranger standing next to me.
Look, Buster. So Buster is a member of ours. He's 78. He's been with us almost 15 years. We go to Vegas once a year at minimal. And while we're in Vegas working and I guess enjoying our time in Vegas as well, what do we make a point to go get and bring back?
Turkish taffy.
Turkish taffy for Buster.
That's our micro basil.
That's it. Yeah.
Turkish taffy.
Yeah. I mean, I have one of my kids in Charlotte. I just happened to ask him one day, he mentioned something about reading, and I asked him, did he like to read, and what does he read and whatever. And, he named off a couple of things. And one of the things he likes reading about and learning about was bugs. And I literally, after that class, I had about a 15-minute break. I went on Amazon, I ordered him a bug book and gave it to him the next class. And you should have seen, like, his whole face lit up. he took off run. I could hear him running down the sidewalk, yelling at his dad to tell him about the book that he just got. That's the kind of stuff that, one, like, that, in the grand scheme of things, it cost me very little. But the effect of such a small thing, what really resonated, not just with his name's Dean, not just with Dean, but with Dean's dad, and like, and it made me feel good too. I mean, it's not to reference more TV, but like,
Friends.
yeah, it's there's no such thing as a
selfless good
good deed.
I just watched that episode recently. Too.
Like, and I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't really care. But when you make somebody else feel good, when you sweat the small stuff, when you pay attention to the details, people remember that, and you can see it on their face and you can hear it in their voice. It does make you feel good about bringing that to somebody, and it should.
Yeah, every chance I get, I'm trying to make sure if it's a student's birthday and I know they're going to be in class, or I think they're going to be in class,
I torture them.
I mean, I torture them if they're teens. For the kids, I try to make it a subtle, like, I want people to know it's their birthday, but we're not going to like bring big attention to them unless I know it's a kid who likes that attention.
Oh yeah, no.
So, for example, I don't know how this happens, but every year Hudson's birthday happens to be on class day, and so it's Hudson Day. And I'm like, all right, happy Hudson Day, everybody. For Hudson Day, we're going to do, and it's all the same stuff, but I use his name liberally, and that attention, I think, really resonates, really matters. And Hudson does not want to be in the front of the class with people cheering and watching him on, but he's happy to know it's his day and that he's special.
Right.
So personal attention, those small details on the person-to-person interaction is what we've covered. But those small details, when we start looking into training, for example, small details can have really big impacts as well there.
Yep.
If we're talking about, the trap and roll, we use trap and roll a lot. Let's talk about a hip bump sweep. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, if your leg is on the ground to knock them over, they're going to flip over. If your leg is slightly up, especially if it's a bigger person, they might not be going anywhere because you need that dramatic difference. Yep. So that could be a 4-degree angle between you being able to do this sweep and not.
Yeah, I use double collar tie clinch, plumb position a lot to illustrate this. The difference in, my hands being on the back of their head versus the back of their neck might be 3 or 4 inches, but in terms of the efficacy of it, it's almost immeasurable. If I'm on the back of their neck, most people will just stand straight up on me. Right. If I move my hands up 3 or 4 inches, I can control much, much bigger, stronger people, at least for a moment in time. And so in cases like that, it's really pretty easy to demonstrate how much difference small adjustments can make. When it comes to experiences, I think that's a lot harder to quantify. But like in what we do for a living, it's pretty easy when it's like, okay, well, this guy's either going to wear me as a necktie because my hands are 3 inches lower than they should be, or I'm going to move around somebody much bigger and stronger than me because I put my hands exactly where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, a literal big impact that you can see and feel.
For a very small
change.
Adjustment.
Yeah. So I want to stay on this idea and take it to the idea of novelty versus nuance. So in the book Grit, which I've referenced a few times on this podcast, one of my favorites, it's by Angela Duckworth. She differentiates that for beginners, novelty is anything new, anything that hasn't been encountered before. While for experts, novelty is or should be nuance. And I feel like a lot of relatively advanced practitioners miss this transitional stage in their journey. They keep looking for these new things, these cool, weird guards or these fun, crazy combinations or whatever it is, when they really should be looking for the very, very small details that mean that now you can hit your hip bump sweep on anyone, doesn't matter the size, because you really understand the nuances versus just the general, or you really understand how to land your rear leg round kick to somebody's head because you really understand the setups and the details and the positioning and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, it's the difference in being moderate, okay, or being great. Like I can be okay at my hip bump sweep, and maybe it works, 30, 40, 50% of the time. Or I can sweat the small stuff. I can pay attention to the detail. I can understand the little nuances, the micro adjustments, and hit it 70, 80% of the time because I'm performing at a high level, because I understand on the outside, maybe to the average person, they look exactly the same.
Mhm.
But to somebody that really knows what they're doing and paying attention, that little bit of a difference in foot placement, leg placement, how I'm using my hips is the difference in whether it works or it doesn't work. We talk about when it comes to what we do, I don't really believe in advanced for,
Mhm.
in the way that most people think about it. I believe in being exceptional at the fundamentals. And that for me is advanced. So, yeah, at earlier stages, you might be able to do these things. But for somebody advanced, they can do it against other people at a very high level. And it's repeatable under stress,
Yeah.
because they do understand the nuance. They do understand the tiny little things that determine whether it works or it doesn't work. And not only that, but everything around it, where understanding before you even try it, it's not going to work because the conditions aren't exactly what they need to be for it to be successful at a high level. And to me, that's advanced.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I'm perpetually obsessing over small details.
Yeah.
So it works out well for me regardless. But if your hip bump sweep is at like a level 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, and you jump over to this crazy whatever escape
Yeah.
because that seems cool, and so you're working on that, you should spend more time building up your other escape, getting it to a higher level,
Right.
understanding more of because once you understand even a more basic thing at a high level, understanding those different nuances and those small little details that facilitate the escape or whatever it is,
Yeah.
you have a better ability to apply it elsewhere because you start learning a format rather than just a thing. It's literally the teach a man to fish versus giving him a fish kind of thing.
Yeah. I subscribe to the Roger Gracie approach, which is basically, and I'm gonna paraphrase and butcher this, but it's basically get really good at 6 things, And when he says really good, he really means like exceptional.
Yeah.
Like, you're so good at these 6 things, people know you're gonna try one of these 6 things, and you're so good at them that
They still can't
they
stop
they
it.
can't stop you. He finished the vast majority of his matches with cross collar chokes. Everybody knew that's what he was going to do, but
Yeah.
he understood not just the technical application of it, but when, and all the conditions around it that needed to be in place to make it happen. And he could manipulate the conditions in a way to help facilitate that.
Without the other person knowing because they weren't
Right.
on that level. They just had no idea.
Right. But he was so good at it.
Yeah.
They knew eventually that's what he was going to do.
Yeah.
But he was so good at it, they couldn't stop him.
So let's use that as a segue into your personal training, which at one point or still is. I'm not sure where you've landed on the branding. But when I first started working for you, it was called Be Great Personal Training. And the tagline was everything in moderation unless you want to be great.
Yeah.
And it was a few podcasts ago. I kept meaning to ask you, but it just hadn't come up really in the conversations on here. But I wanted to know if you still stood by that.
Yeah.
Because ideas change, thought processes change. And I was reading a book called Indistractable, which again, I've referenced on the podcast, Neri All, where he talks about how sometimes getting too obsessed over one thing can be a detriment to other things in your life. And his story in there was about the founder of this technology, and it was, gamifying health and wellness and workouts. And she was like, well, it was midnight and I was getting ready for bed, but a challenge popped up that if I did 100 stair steps, I'd get a point or whatever. And she found herself up at 2 a.m. still walking up and down her basement stairs.
Right.
And so I asked you, do you still stand by that?
Yeah.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Because again, it's not be great at everything.
Yeah.
Right. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you want to be the best power lifter, if you want to be the best programmer, if you want to be the best, I don't care what it is, name it, you are going to have to go all in on that thing. And 100% other parts of your life are going to suffer. Relationships, whatever, work, whatever. I don't subscribe to the thought process that we can be great at lots of different things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it can't be good, we can't be passable, we can't be, but to be great at something, I think Steve Jobs is a good example of this. He was able to build what now I think is probably the most profitable or most valuable corporation on the planet. But he was a terrible father. He was a terrible spouse. He couldn't even work. Like, they literally set up hours for him when nobody else was around because he couldn't work with other people. But he was great at innovation, new products, branding in a way that literally created an ecosystem where people are Apple fanatics, but for sure, other parts of his life really, really suffered, And could he have been still really successful at Apple if he had dialed some of that down and spent some more time on being, a dad, spouse, whatever? Probably, but not to the level that he was, I don't think.
Do you think that's a personality trait? Like, can that be developed in somebody, or do you either have that obsessive willingness to be great and let other things suffer, or you don't?
I think, like anything, I think you can develop it to a degree. You can probably become more like that. I don't know that you can become like that if that's not who you are already.
There's got to be a lot of nature in the beginning, I think, for some kind of mindset
I
like
think
that.
so. And there's something about people like that, high level athletes. You see this where literally the difference in records, Hall of Fame careers, Super Bowls, gold medals, whatever, are measured in fractions of an inch, fractions of a second. We talk about details, micro adjustments. That's literally the difference in you win a gold medal or nobody ever remembers your name.
Yeah.
Fractions of a second.
Yeah.
How many people can name Usain Bolt? And I promise could not name anybody else that he ran against, unless you're just really involved and pay attention to track and field.
Yeah.
And imagine being the second fastest human on the planet and nobody knows who you are.
Rude. No, but yeah,
and it's fractions
of a second. It's crazy.
In that case, where we're talking about being great, you can't say don't sweat the small stuff. You can't say the details don't matter. The details are everything. Players that I've worked with, every now and then, but rarely did I get players that were third string guys, second string guys. I got guys that were at the top of their field that were looking for that extra edge.
Yeah.
Guys that were already Pro Bowls or had played in Super Bowls or whatever, and they were still looking for that little bit extra to either keep them where they were or continue to push them further, because either they figured out that's what needed to happen, or that's just who they were as humans.
At that high level, you really see that being great at something, really going after and getting what you want, is the other side of that is, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up? And that happens on a small scale too. You want to be in shape and able to run a marathon. What are you willing to sacrifice to do that?
Yeah.
Because those things take time.
Listen, whether we make a conscious effort to think about this or not, pretty much every decision we make, there is some internal return on investment conversation happening. We may not be making like really concerted, conscious thought processes about it, but every time we decide to have, I don't know, a soft drink versus a water, there's some sort of return on investment. the short-term sacrifice for the taste of this soft drink over, the benefit of foregoing that for water, that repeated over time is going to have an effect one way or another, for better or worse, depending on what that decision is. And I'm not passing judgment one way or another. What I am saying is something that small
Yeah.
Can make a
Over ti-
huge
repeated over
difference
time.
over time. It's the compound effect. It's Darren Hardy. It's the idea of at very base levels, if we look at what we have control over, one of the most obvious but maybe hardest to like compartmentalize is what we consume.
Mhm.
And so making a decision between water and soft drink or whatever it is, it's something we do all day, every day, whether we think about it or not.
Yeah. So I was going to mention Darren Hardy and the compound effect. And one of his examples for this, there's the monetary side of things. I feel
Sure.
like that's really hard to picture, but he talks about a plane coming from Los Angeles to New York City. And if it's just 1 degree off, that plane could end up 150 miles off course. Now, I can't find any actual like stats about like how often
Right.
flights are off course. And I think Stephen Covey said 90% of the time. And I don't think I can find those stats because it's not really the airplane is off course. It's just this is how you fly.
Yeah.
You make tiny micro adjustments as needed until you can get to where you're going.
Right.
But then we try to look at our life and imagine that there's this straight line between where I am and where I'm going. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
Especially when where we think we want to go can change.
Right.
The flight path is set. If you're getting on this flight in Los Angeles, it is going to New York City, period.
Yeah.
Should be.
Yeah.
But that's just not how life works.
Right.
And so we have to be ready to adjust and change destinations completely.
Yeah.
Life happens by day.
We give this example, especially in like our firearm courses or our active killer defense course, where we use a laser pistol to demonstrate that a target at 20 yards, if my muzzle moves that much, that's the difference in me shooting the bad guy or the good guy.
Yeah.
Because that tiny bit of muzzle movement here equates to 2-3 feet down there.
Yeah. Closer in, you can have a bigger deviation without it having as big of an effect.
Right.
But as it compounds over time,
yeah,
very clear examples of that, of how that distance changes. So on that idea, we tend to want to follow a straight line path.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've talked about habits and habit forming. And you can create habits to help achieve your goal. But then, of course, the other side of habits is you become a victim to the routine.
Yep.
I want to get there. This is what I have to do every morning, 6 a.m., whatever it is. I'm writing, I'm working out, whatever. And you just do that. And you finally get this habit established. And now you're doing the habit because that's what you said you were going to do. And that's just part of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't realize that your goals have changed. Your life has changed. You have a kid now. You have other people you're responsible, whatever it might be.
Right.
Or you're not feeling well, but you wake up at 6 and you go do your workout, and then you're down with the flu for a week because you didn't listen to your body. You just wanted to listen to your habits.
Right.
And so we still need to be ready to use these micro adjustments.
Yeah. And if we are ready and willing to make micro adjustments in real time, then we can probably avoid having to make giant changes on the back end once, we've allowed these little things to again, compound over time, where if we had made little adjustments here and there, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But now that we're 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road, 5 months down the road or whatever, now it's like we have to make a wholesale change because we didn't make these little adjustments as things came up.
Yeah.
And so now it's like a wholesale shift that we have to make, which is even harder to do.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times it almost derails the whole process, because as circumstances changed, I didn't acknowledge them. I didn't make the necessary changes. And now that we're 3 months down the road, the circumstances are much more obvious, much more distinct, much more problematic.
You need a much
And
bigger
I need a
solution.
much bigger solution. And now I have to determine, is it worth it to me or not?
Yeah.
You know, whereas if I had just handled it in that moment and made this little change here and there, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, probably.
Everything is in phases. And the more we get stuck on this idea of forever, this is like a fixed
Yeah.
thing that I want for myself, the harder it is to make those adjustments. And this, I have some issues here. I know you're smiling now. I have some issues here being able to shift courses, because if someone tells me this is what we're doing or this is how this is going to go, it's really hard for me to get that out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling them so they know. I know
Mm-hmm.
you know. I just and literally not even just to the point of not remembering it, but even like continuing to forget that we've had the conversation about reframing it and changing it or whatever it is. You tell me, okay, next week, Monday at 9 a.m., we're doing this. I'm like, okay, great. And then an hour later, you're like, oh, it's 10 a.m. We've still got 3 or 4 more days where I'm like, hey, we're doing that thing Monday at 9 a.m. And you're like, no, 10 a.m. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Actually, no, I'm like, no, you said 9. And then you're like, no. And then I told you 10. Like, I have a hard time shifting it.
Because it's easier just to take the thing that I first realized, I first understood, I was first told, categorize that, put it in a file somewhere, and then
go
move
on with the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as humans, I think, generally speaking, as a species, we don't shift and change very well. You know, I think if you can get to the point where you understand everything is temporary, you know, there's nothing that's permanent. Somebody will say something, but I don't. Generally speaking, everything is in a state of flux. You know, there's no permanence. I don't think.
No man steps in a river twice, for he is not the same man, and it is not the same river.
Right. And then once we understand everything is temporary, then we understand, if we can understand, that my actual control over anything is incredibly limited. It truly is just about my functions as a person and how I react and respond to things that I actually don't have control over. Like that's what we have. And so when a thing changes, or a time, whether it's a time, something small like a time, I understand how that can be, like, not debilitating, but almost like it's bigger.
You create your own obstacle.
Yeah. Yes.
I do feel like, so as kids, it's very day by day. It's very self-centered, and that's all you know. And you don't really understand the concepts of time and planning for the future. One, because it's super not in your control.
Yeah.
You're just going about doing what you're told when you're told to do it. And then as you start moving into adulthood, mostly adults start asking you, well, what college are you going to go to? What do you want to do with your life? And you feel tempted to make these plans, and you do, or you try to, because then you come back around into adulthood. And after you have done the career that you thought you were going to do and decided you didn't want to do that anymore,
Right.
or whatever it is, you realize life is day by day and things are phases. Whether it's my phase right now is waking up at 6 a.m. and working out and then writing part of my novel and then going to work, or that phase is I have to get up at 7 a.m., get the kids ready for school, take them to school, go home, clean the house. Whatever that phase isn't going to last. And
Right.
you have to be ready to make those adjustments as your circumstances change.
Well, and I think that's where coming to the realization and understanding that everything is temporary is important.
Yeah.
Because I think we really screw it up when we look at an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old and we're like, all right, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
The entirety of your life.
Like,
what are you going to
come
do?
on. Yeah. Like, I'm 50. I don't, literally, before we were doing this podcast, we were having a conversation about some things. And I, in the conversation, without me saying, I don't really know what I want to do with the rest of my life, I was saying, I don't really know what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I honestly think there's something wrong with saying, especially at 18,
Yeah.
where you don't know anything about anything, nothing. You know nothing. You know less than nothing. um, Saying, I want to do X for the rest of my life. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking that, because we've all been like, especially depending on what generation we are, we've all been told, look, you got to go to college, you got to get a degree, you got to get a job, blah, 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 whatever. And so you need some direction, right? Yeah. You need some
a place to start.
Yes. But that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a place to start, and being willing to make adjustments when they come up, I think is important. But when you've told somebody, look, you got to do this and this and this and this, and you don't make allowance for making this, that's how people end up with degrees that they don't really want, in jobs they don't really want, in relationships that are unhealthy, because they've been told, well, you don't get a divorce, or you stay in the same job forever, or you got to have a degree, and you always said you wanted to be this, and blah, blah. Humans at age 18 are different than they are at 25, or different than they are at 30, or different. And if you're not, you're doing it wrong, man. And so I think as parents, as leaders, as mentors, as coaches, as whatever you want to ascribe to it, letting people know that it's okay to, one, not know, two, to change, and three, to, at the end of the day, do what's best for you, not because you're trying to please this person or that person or whatever, because ultimately I don't really have any control over that.
I remember getting into, as I was going into college, feeling this sense of almost permanence in my decisions. Like, okay, I'm going to a small liberal college, but I'm forming my opinions and I'm standing by them, and they are my own, and I'm not necessarily influenced by my parents. Like, there's this sense of freedom physically, but also mentally, in how you think and what you believe. And I told this story on this podcast before, I think, of the guy at the dog park who was like, that's all going to change. And I was like, no, it's not. I was just out of college. So I'm like, I spent 4 years learning exactly what I think and believe, only to find out another 10 years later, nope, it all changed. Your experience changes. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
Your entire view of life changes, hopefully because you've experienced different things. You've gone through different things. And so you should change with that.
Well, and my experiences are not my parents' experiences, and vice versa. It's easy to judge the way people view life, but I don't know what their experiences and what they encountered that shaped the way they think. Now, once you know better, you do better, hopefully. But for me to say, well, my great grandparents or my grandparents or whatever, listen, 100 years ago, things were, go back 10 years, and just look at the difference in what you see and experience on the internet and apps and, AI and whatever. So imagine 50, 60, 80 years ago, the changes that have happened in just how people live their lives through daily experience. It's in retrospect, it's easy to judge that, but in reality, it's I don't think really fair to do.
No. Having that perspective, though, of I can see where you are based on how you were raised and how things were, because I see where I am based on how I am and my experience, how things were. And now I can extend that to the next generation of I understand how you are. It doesn't mean I have to agree with any side, but understanding is important. And that's another thing for me that came out of COVID. Unfortunately, I guess if we're finding silver linings, it was this thought process, this perspective that whether people felt like we should all have to wear masks or we shouldn't have to wear masks, they had made that decision based on what they thought was best. Right. So whether I agree with one side or the other, whatever, but if you think that we should all be wearing masks, it's because you think that's the best, safest thing for society. And I respect that you want what's best for people,
right? Because
I feel like we shouldn't have to wear masks. And that's what I feel like is the best thing for society. And that's, we have the same idea. We have the same goal. We just believe it happens in different ways, sometimes in stark opposites.
Right.
And obviously that can be to a detriment,
Sure.
cue Hitler, but having some type of perspective, some kind of grounding value helps you understand and then maybe even relate and have real conversations with people about it.
Yeah, you would hope.
You would hope. I feel like we deviated a little bit from
Yeah,
the
you
compound
did.
effect and adjustments. Sorry for that, but it's all good stuff.
Fucking Hitler came up somehow. I don't.
He always comes up, man. Before we end, I want to kind of tie this together with a quote that's mostly attributable to Wayne Dyer, from what I found anyway. Instagram has been hating on some of my quotes, saying they aren't proven by certain people. And I don't know how to go back and find out if, like, Winston Churchill really said what he did or whatever. But
who cares?
Anyway, so maybe this is Wayne Dyer or not. I don't know. I don't care. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Mm-hmm.
Changing your perspective can change your life, can change everything just in that 1 second. And it's fully within your control.
Yeah. One of the very few things it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah. Your perspective, how you think of things.
Yeah. And sometimes that comes as the result of something traumatic happening in your life or you being exposed to something. It's like, it's very easy for me to pass judgment on a thing that I've never experienced.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I experience it or somebody close to me experiences it. And then you start looking at it a little bit differently because it's personal now. You have an attachment to it.
Yeah.
That's why I like social media for all the good that it could do. I think has done a really good, in air quotes, job of creating these divides where you have people that feel very, very strongly and passionately about a thing. You talked about the mask thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And, I think in a lot of cases, it's because they've been personally affected by it.
Right.
And so that's their filter. That's what's driving why they feel and express in a certain way. And maybe somebody that opposes it hasn't experienced it, or they did and their experience was different,
Yeah.
And I think we have to we don't have to, but I think we should make allowances for understanding that people have different experiences than us. And it doesn't make them right or wrong. It just makes them different. And I can't say, I can say I don't agree with you.
Right.
But saying that shouldn't negate whatever their experience was.
Well, it's because right and wrong they don't really exist.
Yeah. It's Shakespeare, it's nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's whatever value we put on the experience or the thing, it's like, well, what is Deadpool worth? Well, I know what I paid for it, but that doesn't really matter. What is somebody else willing to pay for it,
Yeah. The universe is indifferent.
Yes.
The things are indifferent. The things happen.
I think once you can get to that place and understand that the universe truly is indifferent, that things are temporary, that your control is very minimal, then that should, all of those things should be very freeing.
Yeah.
It should give me opportunities now because I don't stress about things that I don't have control. I don't stress about things that seem like they're never going to end or change, because they are. I promise they're gonna.
Yeah.
And I should make changes where I can and not hold on to a thing just because,
That's the way I've always done it. Yeah. All right.
Microbasil.
Fuck yeah. Before we head out, leave us a comment, Spotify, YouTube, head to Instagram. Let us know about a small change that you've made, a tiny adjustment that had a big impact on your life, or maybe one small adjustment that you're planning to make, whether it's drinking a glass of water in the morning or starting a workout plan or meditating, whatever it is. Let us know. Share those micro adjustments. Fuck yeah. Okay, good. So that's our look at micro adjustments. Fuck yeah. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave us 5 stars, follow, share, subscribe with the bell icon on Spotify. Y'all are doing great over on YouTube, subscribing, and especially on Spotify, sending those reviews. We really appreciate your help. Join the conversation on social media too. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, overreact, go comment on everything, tell everybody about how terrible this is, and share your favorite awful podcast. Thanks for listening to Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.